Please welcome to the stage, Sarah Hartshorne.
Set up here. I have a kit. So this is the story about how I became very passionate about reproductive rights. Right now I work for an organization that used to be called Lady Parts Justice League, and thank you. We're now called Abortion Access Front. Yeah, thank you. I tell you what, people did not used to clap. That is new. I guess it's true what they say. You don't know what you've got till it's gone, except for abortions. It's a thinker. No, but I grew up in a very small town in Massachusetts. It was 700 people. My graduating class was 13 kids. It was also a very liberal part of Massachusetts. It's like lots of pottery, lots of gay farmers, lots of Subarus. Do you know, like, it was a scene. It's very accepting. It was a wonderful place to grow up. But my stepdad was actually very conservative, and my mom was very into not arguing with him. So we never talked about politics. We certainly never talked about abortion. I don't even remember ever hearing the word except once him saying that it was, a crime against God. And that was really the only time I ever heard it mentioned even. I don't even really remember ever thinking about it until this moment in my 8th grade English class. I had a very liberal, very well-meaning teacher named Miss Henderson. I was supposed to change her name. Sorry. It's not bad. She doesn't do anything terrible, but you're just supposed to change the... let's say Miss Williamson. Oh, I got that wrong again. But so she was very well-meaning, and this was also an 8th grade class that I desperately wanted to have like me. I was and still am a compulsive people pleaser. I hate conflict. And so, up until that point, I had been just painfully shy and just constantly trying to be liked. That was all I wanted. And it was English class. It was afternoon. And Miss Williamson said to us, she posed a question to the class. She asked us if a woman who was pregnant with her 6th child should be forced to have an abortion when all 5 children that she'd already given birth to had all been born addicted to drugs. So should she be forced to have an abortion, and should she be forced to have her tubes tied so that she couldn't have any more kids that would theoretically be born addicted to drugs? And everyone in the class said, yes, of course, she should be forced to give up that baby. She should be forced to have an abortion, and she shouldn't be allowed to have any more kids. And I felt this feeling come over my body. I felt like really hot in my face, and it was radiating all the way down to my feet. And I now know that that's what's called having an opinion when you're a woman. I know that now. But at the time, I was like, what is this feeling? I'm so sweaty. And I said, no, she has to be allowed to have that baby. She has to be allowed to have as many babies as she wants. If I want to be allowed to have an abortion, she has to be allowed not to. Like, choice means being able to make a choice, even if I don't agree with that choice. And even if you don't agree with that choice. And I remember saying that, and Miss Williamson said, oh, that's okay, guys. Sarah's just playing devil's advocate. Aren't you, Sarah? And I said, no. And I felt that feeling again. And I was very sweaty again. And I said, no, I really believe this. I really believe that choice has to go 2 ways. And I really believe that if I am to be given power over my body, she has to be given power over hers. And that was a very defining moment for me, but it was also a little bit of a blip. And then, I went on my merry way. I finished high school. I was pretty stoked to get right on out of Dodge. Actually, the town was called Heath, but close enough. And so I went to Boston University, which is a huge school in Boston. And at one point during an orientation tour, they were like, there are 800 cardiovascular machines in our gym. And I was like, everyone in my town could work out, and also some of the sheep. It was just very surreal. It was a very different experience than anything I'd ever seen before. And it's true what they say about, small town girls who've been sheltered. Like, I immediately went bananas. I was just drinking all the time and partying and just banging anything that moved. And I was like, oh, also I'm gay. Let's bang anything that moves. It was amazing. Yeah. So just a lot of options, And and then it was the second semester of my freshman year, and my period was late. And it was like quite late. And it was also quite regular. So that was quite a big deal. And I pushed it to the back of my head. I was like, no, we're just not going to think about that. This is not real. This is not happening. And after a couple weeks, my friend was like, all right, Sarah, you have to deal with this. You have to go get a pregnancy test. And I had no money. I was so flat broke that I couldn't afford the pregnancy test. So she lent me some money. And I went to a dollar store, and I realized when I got there that I didn't know how much pregnancy tests cost, and I hadn't borrowed enough money. And so I had to scrape in the bottom of my purse to get change. And as I stood there scraping in the bottom of my purse to get change to pay for a pregnancy test at a dollar store, I was like, you know what? I know what I'm going to do if I am pregnant. The choice is quite clear. If I can't afford a pregnancy test, and I don't know how much a pregnancy test costs, and I am at a dollar store, I am not having this baby. And I feel pretty good about it. I felt relief, honestly. I was like, oh, okay. I know I have a plan. Everything's fine. And so I went back to my dorm room, and I went to the bathroom. I had my own bathroom, which was a pretty big deal. Pretty exciting. And I couldn't even in movies, when they take a pregnancy test, they always put it down and they don't look at it. And they're like, oh, I can't look at it. I could not look away. I was like, I have to watch this happen. And I remember it was blue for no and pink for yes, or maybe the other way around. But it was blue for one and pink for the other. And I watched it. And it was supposed to take 90 seconds. And I watched for many more than that. I watched for about 4 minutes, and it just stayed purple. I was like, well, that's not one of the options. I looked at the box, and I was like, do I call the number? I was like, I don't know if I can be that person that calls the dollar store pregnancy test number. I don't know if I can be that person right now. And I remember that I'd heard somewhere that pregnancy tests could only have false positives. And it's important to stress that is not true. That is a fact that I heard somewhere and was like, well, that seems accurate. I'm just going to hold that to gospel. Because I was very young and stupid, but also young and hopeful, which is just fun. And I was like, so if there can't be false negatives and it's purple, then that probably means that I'm not pregnant. So I was like, cool. Not pregnant, not going to worry about it anymore. And it was a similar thing to when my period had been late, where I was just taking the worry that was very justified and just putting it in the back of my head and not thinking about it. And when my friend asked, I was like, it said I wasn't pregnant. And then a couple weeks later, I was sitting in my dorm room. I was by myself. My roommate was at class, and I hadn't felt great. And I started to feel incredibly painful, what I thought was menstrual cramps. And I was like, well, that's weird. My period's not due for, it's not the time for my period, but it hurt so much. And then pretty immediately I realized that I was miscarrying. I just knew even before I looked to see if I was bleeding, which I 100p was, very much. And so I went into the bathroom, and I was bleeding, and it was very gross. And I now know, in retrospect and in hindsight, that what I was seeing and what I was experiencing was that I was bleeding very heavily. I was miscarrying, and I saw the fetal sac. It's very small, but if you don't know what it is, it's very jarring. It's just very visceral. It's goo. It's and the blood is very red. It's not like period blood. And when you're 19 and that how old I was? However old you are, 18, 19, and you're not used to being confronted with your body in this way. It was very jarring, but it was also such a relief. Like, I just remember it felt like all of this anxiety was pouring out of my body. And the only disappointment I felt was that I had been so disconnected from my body, that I had let myself sort of prioritize a false sense of relief. And I had let myself prioritize like what I wanted to be true. And I hadn't paid attention to what was going on with my body. And I was sad for myself that I had been so disconnected from it in that way. And I felt all this relief that I could be connected again, and that I wasn't pregnant, and that I could just go about my life again without having this little worry in the back of my head. And so, you know, I now know that I should have gone to the doctor, but I didn't. And it was all fine. And I just went about my life, and I didn't even really tell anyone for a long time, because it didn't occur to me to tell anyone, because it was such a private experience, you know. It felt so small, but it felt so much like it was mine. It was something that I had gone through with my body, and I didn't feel like I owed it to anyone to tell anyone. But I did end up mentioning it to a friend a couple months later, and she was amazing. And I didn't appreciate how amazing she was at the time, because she was like, oh, that happens all the time. It's really common. Like 15 to 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriage that we know of. It's probably way more. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. Should we get Starbucks? Let's get Starbucks. And we just went about our life, and it was no big deal. And I had no idea how amazing that was, because later, a couple weeks later, when I told my boyfriend, who I was like 80% sure was the father, you know, like pretty sure, like, he had like a good shot, you know what I mean? Like his hat was like for sure in the ring. I told him that it had happened, and he cried, and he hugged me, and he held me to him like really close. And it was one of those very awkward situations where like your face is pressed up against someone's body, and you're like, all right, there. Everything's okay. And I didn't see myself, and I didn't see my experience in his reaction, but I wasn't going to correct him, and I didn't want to be an asshole about it. And so, you know, I just said, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you for being so supportive. But it didn't feel like me. I felt like a ghost in my own story that I'd told him. Also, at one point, he was like, I know you can't believe this, but I know how you feel. And I was like, you're right. I do not believe that. Hit the nail on the head. And then, you know, I think about a year later, I very casually mentioned it to my mom, and it was the same thing. She cried, and she grabbed me to her, and she was just so upset. And she said, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And anytime I have mentioned it to someone, that's always the thing they say. They say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm like, okay, but like, that shit saved me like $600. You understand? Like, I was very relieved. And I don't know how to convey that without seeming like an insensitive person, but I was never going to have that baby. I was never even going to be attached to that baby. And I was never afraid that something was wrong with me. You know, I always knew that it was a very normal thing that happens to a lot of people. I was very lucky. I know that it is a very serious, sad thing for a lot of people, and I don't want to trivialize that at all. But I also want to be able to have had the experience that I had, and I want to be honest about it. And for so long, I just felt like I couldn't, because it seemed like I must be some terrible person. So again, fast forward several years later, and I now work for Abortion Access Front. And when you work for a reproductive rights nonprofit, people love telling you their abortion stories. It's like their favorite thing. And so I've heard so many stories, and it's amazing. The breadth of experiences and the width of human emotion that can be contained in that is so beautiful and astonishing. And it's such an honor to be able to witness it and to be able to be there for people. And I remember, you know, there was a woman in Texas, and and she told me the story about how she had an abortion when she was 23, and she's thought about it every day of her life since then. And it was an incredibly hard decision for her to make, and she wasn't sure if it was right. And, you know, she still feels a lot of guilt over it. And, you know, I couldn't relate to that personally, but I want her to have the space for that experience so much. And, you know, she was talking to me and a friend of mine, and my friend said something that has stuck with me so much. She said, you don't have to be proud of your choice just because you're not ashamed of it. And I think that that's so true. And you don't have to be proud of your choice just because you would make the same choice again. Some things can just be true. And I think that that is so key in this fight for reproductive justice and for reproductive rights and for autonomy over our own bodies. We just have to let some things be true. We have to let truth be truth. And that's so important. And, thank you guys. Thank you so much. And the thing is that is one of many, right? I've also heard from so many women that they also felt awful because they didn't feel awful. You know, I talked to a woman in Mississippi, and I was escorting at an abortion clinic, and they're amazing, side note. But, and she said, you know, I hope there's nothing wrong with me, but I don't feel bad. I want to just go back to work. I think I'm fine. And I was like, you are fine. And that's okay. And that's so great. And I told her my story about how I felt awful and I felt like there was something wrong with me. And we had this moment where we were like, I guess we're just going to go about our lives and be fucking awesome now. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's what we're going to do. And we high-fived and we did. And it was amazing. And that is what is true for us. And I think the thing is, and I think especially as people are becoming aware of all of the forces in this country and all of the people in this country, and I say people, but like Amin men, do you know? Hashtag not all men, but like, there are so many powerful and religious and conservative men that are trying so hard to restrict access, and they are doing that using deceitful methods, and they are doing that by lying to women, and it's awful and it sucks, and I am so glad that I get to fight against it every day, but sometimes it feels like a losing battle, and sometimes it's really frustrating, but I think back again and again to what my friend said, which is that you don't have to be proud of your choice just because you're not ashamed of it, and to just let some things be true, and to just let truth be truth, and to keep telling it as much as I can. And so that is what I try to do. And so that also means that I spend a lot of time interacting with anti-choice people, with very extreme anti-choice people. And they always love to shame us. They love to make us feel bad. And they love to ask, like, how many abortions have you had? That's the thing that they always love to yell. And my boss always says, I don't know. I don't keep receipts. Which I think is pretty great. But what I always say is that I'm honest with them. I say I haven't had any abortions. I just had a miscarriage, which is like God's abortion, right? And turns out they don't like that. They don't care for that at all. But it turns out I don't care. So that's my story. Thank you so much.